disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research. Fair use as a use permitted it by the copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing.
Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. I am Afro. Please do me a favor as you enter the room and hit the thumbs up button for me. I really appreciate it. Today's video is going to be about the Keddie Cabin Slaughter, and this is a true crime video. So without further ado, everybody, let's get into it. Here we go.
On the morning of April 12, 1981, 14-year-old Sheila Sharp woke up after sleeping at a local neighbor's house for the night. She ate her breakfast, chatted with her neighbors, and then at around 7 a.m. decided to go back home and join her family in cabin number 28. She walked across the short path to her home, turned the handle, and pushed open the door expecting to be greeted by her mother, sister, brothers, and a local friend who stayed the night. Instead, she was met with a gruesome, violent, and frenzied murder scene. She discovered the brutally tortured corpses of her mother, brother, and his friend scattered around the blood-stained living room, and no sign of her younger sister. In July of 1979, Susan Sharp packed up the family's possessions and left the home they shared with her husband in Connecticut and moved across the country to California. This was to be a new start for the family and for Sue, who was trying to escape her abusive husband James. Her brother Don lived in Northern California at that time, and it seemed like a good idea to be close to family when trying to leave an abusive partner behind, as then at least if James tracked her down, she would have some support. When she arrived in California, she had little to no money, no job, no valuables, and 5 kids to feed. So she took the trailer in which her brother used to live in Quincy. And despite the fact it was a tight fit for a family of 6, they felt relieved and happy to move somewhere new and start fresh. Not too long after arriving in California, an opportunity arose to move into a place called the Keddie Resort. Keddie was formerly a family resort which had fallen on hard times, and so the owner had converted many of the holiday cabins into low-income housing instead. One such cabin had recently been vacated by Sylvester Thomas, the county sheriff. And so, Susan packed their things up again and moved into cabin 28 of the Keddie Resort.
Okay, let me make this correction. I pronounced it wrong. I said Keddie, not Keddie. I don't know what I was looking at, but because there was no I in there, but correction is Keddie. Okay, Keddie, not Kitty. All right, back to the video.
Mother Susan and her kids John, Sheila, Tina, Rick, and Greg all looked forward to hopefully starting a new life together. On the morning of April 11th, Susan took a trip with Sheila and Greg and drove to pick up Rick, who was trying out for the baseball team at Gansner Field in Quincy. On their way, they spotted her son John and his friend Dana trying to hitchhike their way back into Keddie and pick them up. A couple of hours later, after arriving back in Keddie, John and Dana hitchhiked their way back to Quincy again, as they had planned to meet friends there at around 3:30 p.m. At around that time, the pair were spotted by eyewitnesses in the downtown area of Quincy. Later that evening, Sue's daughter Sheila arranged to stay over at the Seabolt's house, who were a family who lived in the adjacent home. Sue would stay home with her sons Rick and Greg and their friend Justin Smart, whose family also had a cabin nearby. Tina had been watching TV at the Seabolt residence since they came back from the trip to Quincy. At 7 p.m, Sheila entered the Seabolt cabin to stay the night. And at 10 p.m, Tina said goodbye and went back to her own cabin at number 28 to join her mother and brothers. When Sheila opened the door to her cabin, she was immediately confronted with the horrific and brutal deaths of her mother, John, and his friend Dana. The floor and walls were covered in bloodstains, and there were random knife marks in the walls. All three victims had been bound with electrical tape and electrical cords. Sue was laid on her side near the sofa in the living room. She was nude from the waist down and had been gagged with a blue bandana and her own underwear, which had been fixed in place with electrical tape. Despite being naked from the waist down, the autopsy report states that there were no signs of forced sexual trauma. She had been stabbed in the chest and then stabbed horizontally in the neck, going through her larynx and also slightly catching her cervical spine.
That's crazy. Why would you strip someone from the waist down? I've never heard of that before. I ain't gonna lie, I never heard of that before. I know y'all gonna say, well, why is that really important? It's important because I never heard of it before. You know, normally there will be some type of rape or whatever the case may be. But at this point, this person decided to not rape the lady, but strip the lady. That's something just really not heard of really often at all. So yeah, that was crazy. And then the girl walks in there with all this blood all over the walls and duct taped and all of it. What in the hell is going on in that cabinet? That cabin. My words is just twisted today. I don't know what the hell going on. But anyway, back to the video.
She also had bruises and imprints from where she'd been struck with the butt of an air rifle. John was found close by. His throat had been cut and had suffered blunt force trauma blows from a hammer. Dana had been repeatedly struck in the head with a hammer and then manually strangled to death until he asphyxiated. Lying on the floor was a bloodied hammer and a steak knife which had been jammed into the victim so hard that it had bent at a 30-degree angle.
Oh my goodness. That's what you call. Oh my god. And that's brutal. That's really brutal. Could you imagine being hit in the head with a hammer? Stabbed so hard that the knife bent? Oh, this person was really, really deranged. This is cringing. Wow. Back to this crime scene. Oh my goodness.
After the immediate horror subsided, Sheila ran back over to the Seabolt residence to get help. Jamie, the eldest Seabolt son, went back to the cabin with Sheila where he looked in the bedroom windows and amazingly saw that all three of the young boys were still in bed sleeping. He knocked loudly on the window and woke them up and motioned for them to exit through the window so that they wouldn't see the gruesome crime scene in the living room. Police were then contacted and began their investigation. After interviewing, Sheila and the Seabolt family both stated that they heard nothing unusual coming from cabin 28 throughout the night. However, a couple living in number 16 stated that they were woken at 1:15 a.m. by what sounded like muffled screaming. Rick Sharp was interviewed by the police and stated he fell asleep at 10 p.m. and did not wake again until the following day when Jamie Seabolt knocked on the window. This was echoed by Justin Smart, but the police did not initially interview 5-year-old Greg Smart. Police also interviewed neighbours at number 14 and someone else living in a mobile home not too far away. Neither neighbour heard any commotion in the night. Upon walking the scene, police noticed that there were no signs of forced entry and that Tina's jacket and a box containing various tools had gone missing from the Sharp cabin. The telephone had also been disconnected and the curtains closed. When local neighbour Martin Smart, father to Justin Smart, had been interviewed, he had claimed that a claw hammer had gone missing from his possession and he had no idea how or when. Sheriff Thomas commented that Smart had seemed to provide endless clues, which all seemed to point away from himself. Despite almost nobody hearing anything unusual in the night, several neighbours did report seeing an unfamiliar green van parked outside the Sharps' house at 9 p.m. Upon further interview, Justin Smart, Martin Smart's stepson, changed his story and its details, later stating that he had dreamed details of the murders and then later claiming to have actually witnessed them. When questioned under hypnosis, he described being awoken by sounds coming from the living room when he was still sleeping in the bedroom. When he went to see what was happening, he claimed to see Sue with 2 men, one with a mustache and short hair, the other clean-shaven with long hair, both wearing glasses. Justin stated that John and Dana entered the home and began arguing with the men. A fight broke out, after which Tina entered the room and was then dragged out of the cabin's back door, never to be seen again. Based on Justin's description, a composite sketch was created by a police volunteer and local amateur artist, despite the FBI allowing the sheriff's office to access the most decorated forensic artists. No reason was given for this. Sheriff Thomas, who presided over the case, stated that the case was very frustrating, as despite the gruesome scene, little to no clues ever led to solid leads or suspects. The FBI began an investigation into the abduction of Tina Sharp, as it remains
I must say this is one weird crime scene, because one of the guys said that his hammer was missing from his cabin, and a knife was missing from, I guess, was it the victim's cabin or something? This is weird because, and it has to be an inside job, because how would people know where this stuff is at? You would have to know where someone actually really keep their hammer and a knife. So, being that said, right, wherever the knife came from and wherever the hammer came from, those are the 2 places you definitely have to look at with a side eye and go through that with a fine-tooth comb. Because within those 2 places, it had to be someone within that place. This is weird how the cops saying that it's very hard, but to really find out who did it, thus far, because we haven't got to the end of the video, right? So right now, it just, I hate a dumbass crime. Like some of these cops, some of these detectives, I don't know what the hell. I really don't. Anyway, back to the crime scene. This is ridiculous.
still to be recovered and there were no signs of her death at the crime scene. However, after weeks with no sign of either Tina, kidnapper, or ransom demands, the FBI backed off their investigation. This was a little controversial since it hadn't been determined a homicide at this point, so fell within FBI jurisdiction as kidnapping is a federal offense. Some people at the time argued that it should have remained an active FBI kidnapping case until proven otherwise, which would have afforded a much greater amount of manpower and funding to the investigation. Sheriff Thomas had described the FBI presence at the time as unnecessary. Local police suspected known and recently captured interstate serial killers Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole to be the killers in the Keddie case and began to investigate them, eventually concluding that the two killers were in a different state at the time of the murder, and their killings were also not consistent with the MO in the Keddie case either. The Lee Lucas cases themselves were not without controversy, as he confessed to over 600 murders, which upon further scrutiny couldn't have been possible, but local rangers in those cases defended their work, claiming it to be high quality, despite the fact none of the confessions were recorded, making it impossible to know how much information Lucas had beforehand and how much was fed to him during questioning. This led to many questions about the validity of Lucas's claims. A man collecting bottle caps in the nearby town of Feather Falls in Butte County, approximately 100 miles away from Keddie, discovered a piece of human skull and also a piece of mandible bone. He immediately reported the find, and the Butte County Sheriff Office began to investigate the area and found a blue nylon jacket, a pair of Levi jeans with the back pocket missing, and an empty medical tape dispenser. The remains were later identified by the forensic pathologist as belonging to Tina Sharp, confirming what many had feared previously. Tina Sharp had also been murdered. The primary initial suspect was Martin Smart, Marilyn's husband and Justin's stepfather, who cast suspicion upon himself by offering up the information that a claw hammer was missing from his possession, even though details of murder weapons wasn't publicly available at that time. He would also offer information which Sheriff Thomas felt was designed to intentionally throw suspicion away from Marty. Marilyn Smart said that she felt the composite sketch matched Marty, and also gave details of Marty and his friend Bo burning something in a wooden stove at 2 a.m. on the night of the murder. Later in the case, Mike Gamberg found a letter from Marty to Marilyn after he moved away to Nevada following the breakdown of their marriage. In the letter, Marty seems to confirm that he had killed 4 people when he states, "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." The letter had been overlooked and never logged into the chain of custody as evidenced by the sheriff's department. Marilyn confirmed the handwriting as belonging to Marty. A claw hammer matching the one Marty reported missing and potentially being used in the murder was also recovered from a nearby lake years later, though no physical evidence remained on the items, so it would not be possible to definitively tie the item to the murder. A veterans counselor from Reno, Nevada would come forward offering information that Marty had confessed to murdering Sue and Tina during therapy sessions. The counselor claims that he informed the FBI and the DOJ about this, but it was dismissed as hearsay. The counselor didn't have any recordings of the session and did not have notations from the session either. It was also claimed that the counselor asked Marty if he was given a polygraph test, and according to the therapist, Marty boasted that he lied and beat the test. Marty would supposedly be motivated to murder Sue Sharp because she was interfering with Marty's marriage. It was said that Marty was physically abusive to Marilyn, and she often confided in Sue, who, as a domestic abuse victim herself, would encourage Marilyn to leave Marty. Sheriff Thomas stated that Martin was interviewed under a polygraph test and showed no signs of deception. He also mentions in a documentary that Marilyn and Marty would often come to him for marital advice. Neither the sheriff's initial investigation nor any since has been able to find any physical evidence linking Marty to the crime. His friend Bo was thought by many to have conducted the murders with Marty. It's unlikely one person would have been able to control a room with 4 people inside, and so both the sheriff and the FBI worked under the assumption that there must have been at least 2 assailants. During an interview for a documentary, Marilyn stated that Marty had tried to persuade Sue to come to the bar with him, as Bo had taken a liking to her, but that Marilyn had told Marty that Sue didn't drink and was not interested. This could potentially give Bo a motivation for the crime also. There are also some people who say that Sheriff Thomas was a good friend of Marty's and so shielded him during the investigation and gave him advice on how to get away with the crime. This is mostly based on a recorded conversation between Thomas and Marty, which has his "if I did it" moment and describes how he would manage a group of people he intended to harm. Thomas himself denies being any friend of Marty's in a documentary interview. Bo was alleged to have ties to gangs in Chicago and possibly a former member of the Chicago Mafia, which, if true, may demonstrate his willingness to engage in violent acts. There was also a theory that Bo was an FBI informant on the Chicago Mafia, and he was protected by the DOJ in order to maintain that information pipeline on the Mafia. Another common theory was that someone in the Sharp family, or Dana Wingate, had become mixed up in drugs, that perhaps they had ripped someone off and the murders was punishment for this. A local resident named Carla McMullen told detectives later that Dana had stolen an unknown quantity of LSD from drug dealers, though she was not able to provide any evidence or corroborating witness for this statement. Some people have posited the idea that the attack and subsequent kidnapping and murder of Tina is part of a plot for a predator to groom her, with one report stating that the FBI agent John Douglas had believed that Tina may have been involved in the murders and that the groomer then murdered her later to protect himself. There are some rumours of a teacher who was also a convicted sex offender, whom people say groomed Tina and then convinced Tina to assist murdering her family so that they could run away together. There are, however, no solid details on this, and it seems a stretch that a 12-year-old girl would orchestrate the murder of 4 people to please her groomer, who would then murder her later anyway.
Oh boy, this is too much. So the I guess the other daughter came up missing, but they try to use her as an alibi to say that she was into drugs and all this other shit. And by her being, I guess, I don't know if she was using the drugs or whatever the case may be. So then, therefore, she was able to kill other people. I can't see this 14-year-old having that much power to get away with killing all these people in that cabin. I can't see it. And then you want to kidnap the girl to kill the girl. Why? So the girl won't tell who actually really did it. Even if she knew who did it, I still don't believe that she was part of killing her own family. This is twisted. Anyway, back to the video.
On website Keddie28.com, admin DMAC has long held the theory that Sheila herself was either the murderer or one of the murderers. In long posts on the site, he describes how Sheila detests her mother because of her poor parenting skills and supposed promiscuity. The theory talks about how because of these things, Sheila Sharp wanted her mother Susan dead. The theory stems from perceived small discrepancies or inaccuracies in police reports regarding a light bulb and hearsay accounts regarding the Sharp family. The theory then concludes that the murderers and the Plumas County Sheriff's Office conspired together to cover up the murder. In a documentary filmed years later, a former deputy, Mike Gamberg, stated in an interview that he felt that politics played a big hand in why the investigation was kept in-house so vehemently.
Politics played a big role in the whole thing. We had a sheriff that was trying to make probably more of a name for himself, and rather than relying on the expertise of the Department of Justice when it first started out, he tried to do things himself.
And then, in 2018, DNA was matched to a living suspect from a piece of tape at the crime scene. But as of yet, nobody has been arrested as far as I'm aware.
Okay, so DNA was found on the tape. Okay, got it. Who was it? Whose DNA? You said that much. Why can you just tell us who DNA was found on the tape? Ugh. Now that was annoying. Anyway, back to the video. Could have just said it.
Hi, this is the section of the video where I give you my thoughts and opinions based on the evidence that I've seen. I have to stress that none of this is
Okay, give me your thoughts and your opinion, because right about now, this is aggravating, this is confusing, this is all over the place, this is ridiculous, okay? So yeah, by all means, give me your point of view. I'm waiting. Back to the video.
fact. This is all just my opinion based on the evidence that I've seen in the case. So, let's start. While it seems like a compelling story to say that a friend's abusive husband bumped off someone who was persuading his wife to leave him, there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence to support this theory. For a start, the crime scene was an extremely bloody one, with blood on the walls, on the ceiling, and knife marks all over the place. It's hard to imagine a professional crime scene analyst coming away from the scene without some evidence on their clothes or their hair or their skin. So for a man like Marty, who was also reported to be seen drunk that night, to be able to brutally murder 4 people and not leave a single piece of evidence from himself or take any evidence on himself seems unlikely. I also find the evidence that people levy against him to be very circumstantial. The idea that he was friends with Sheriff Thomas seems to be based entirely on a phone conversation between him and the sheriff in which there are no signs that they were friends. The conversation itself is Marty talking about how you could control multiple people when robbing them, and talks about how you would need either a gun or more than one person to control 4 victims. Something which is really just common sense and not criminal mastermind. And there's also the popular theory amongst all investigators too. The most incriminating pieces of evidence against Marty are the counselor and the letter. So we'll start with the counselor. It sounds very incriminating when a counselor states that he admitted murdering the 2 boys in a therapy session, perhaps under the misguided belief that the therapist couldn't tell anyone because of patient-doctor confidentiality. However, newsflash for everyone, the therapist, psychologist, or doctor is totally allowed to speak to the police and report a crime if they believe that you are engaged in a serious criminal act. But this therapist had no notes or recordings of the sessions, and it would be just his testimony to back this up with. No corroborating evidence at all, which is why the DOJ and the Sheriff's Office referred to it as hearsay.
And that part in itself is strange and weird, because we all know when it comes to, for the most part, especially psychiatrists, people like that, even some doctors, depends on what kind of doctor that they are, it has to be recorded, right? Anytime somebody is being investigated or talking to a specialist or whatever the case may be, for the most part, it is being recorded, especially a psychiatrist. That's being recorded. It's being notes taken down. But this guy had no recordings, no notes, no nothing. So they're just going to go by what he said? Nah. Back to the video.
Because technically it is. If there's no evidence to support it, it is just someone's opinion, so it's hearsay. This would leave way too much room for reasonable doubt in court and would not be enough to convict Marty. So even if what the therapist said was true, it wouldn't be enough for law enforcement or prosecutors to pursue Marty anyway. Secondly, there's the letter. While I do find the idea that Sue was giving Marilyn advice on how to leave Marty to be pretty likely, given that they were neighbours and Sue had not long since escaped a similar situation, the letter itself is extremely commonly misread, and I think I know why. You'll often see or hear people refer to the comment at the end of the letter in which Marty says he paid the price of Marilyn's love with 4 people's lives, which does sound pretty incriminating, until you read all 3 letters in full. Yeah, there's actually 3 letters, all from Marty, begging Marilyn to take him back. He references multiple times how much he loves her kids and her, and that he doesn't see the same love from her towards his kids. Marty has 4 kids, which he doesn't see anymore because he claims he sacrificed time with them because Marilyn didn't like them. In fact, in the same letter which he makes the incriminating statement, the letter starts by talking about his 4 kids and that he sacrificed them for her. So it's pretty clear that the 4 lives that he's referencing at the end of the letter aren't the murder victims, it's his kids. So why does nobody else ever mention this? Not even news reports. I think the reason is that they were all basing their opinions on this one photo, this one, which only shows the bottom portion of the letter. And I was curious about the full letter, so I went digging around and I found all 3, and I read all 3. Had anyone else done the same thing, they couldn't possibly have jumped to the conclusion that Marty was confessing to murder, because the context and language of the letters make it pretty clear that he's not talking about murder victims, he's talking about his kids. Some people say that authorities conspired to cover up the whole thing, but what would be their motive to cover up a quadruple homicide in a tiny town which has no relevance or significance to anyone or anything? Also, the people who claim this must have tremendous faith in the US government's ability to be a slick operator. But personally, I just don't find them to be all that efficient at many things. So I find it unlikely that so many different agents and agencies could cover anything up for a significant length of time without any evidence coming out. While informants have been a key tool in the FBI arsenal ever since its inception really, there's very strict rules on how informants are allowed to operate, and what actions they're allowed to take or not take. Contrary to what TV and film shows us, informants and undercover agents don't have permanent carte blanche to do as they please. They're allowed to engage in criminal activity as long as it serves the needs of an investigation, but each crime committed must be cleared by the Attorney General, and all activity must be reported to the FBI Director also. Should the crime being committed carry a serious risk of violence, the special agent in charge is required to personally inform the Attorney General in order to authorize extraordinary criminal activity. And FBI agents also don't have the authority to offer immunity to anyone. For immunity to be granted, the agent needs to inform both the Director of the FBI and the prosecutor, and the prosecutor would be the one who would grant immunity. In case you think that the FBI would just, bury any evidence that they covered things up to protect their image or reputation, there is a very famous example case of John Connolly Jr., an FBI agent who was the handler for Boston gangster James Whitey Bulger, who was also an FBI informant and the inspiration for the movie The Departed. Connolly didn't follow any of these rules and was subsequently sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, and James Bulger was not given immunity either, also being sentenced for the crimes committed whilst he was an FBI informant. So, while it's not impossible that Bo was an FBI informant, it's extremely unlikely that he would be allowed to wantonly and brutally murder 4 innocent people on a whim, with no repercussions for those actions.
Okay, but here's my thing. I don't put nothing past nobody. Any and everybody really is capable of committing a crime or committing murder. As soon as you underestimate someone, that could be the person that actually really did it. So I'm not going with that just because he's part of FBI. What's likely he's gonna commit murder? No. Okay, let me tell you something. Some of these people that's in the highest places are the ones that's able to get away with stuff. Now, it may take a long time for people to actually really figure them out, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Okay? Anyway, back to the video. So that's bullshit. But back to the video.
And even less likely that this whole thing would stay hidden for 40 years. Despite Numerous investigations on both men conducted by the former sheriff, the new sheriff, and the FBI. No solid evidence was ever collected against them. Personally, based on reports, it doesn't sound like neither man was particularly nice, but there is just no evidence to tie them to the case. The county does have a long history of problems with a variety of different drugs.
And that's another thing too. That because someone wasn't convicted of a crime doesn't mean they didn't do that crime. Okay? You just couldn't prove it, but it doesn't mean that they didn't do it. Do you know how many crimes that go cold? I mean, for years on end? Do you know how many people that are in jail for committing crimes that they didn't do and they had already done spent 40, 50 years in jail? So we're not going to sit here and pretend as if these things doesn't happen, because they do. So again, because it wasn't enough evidence to commit them for doing that crime does not mean that they didn't do the crime. I'm just saying. Back to the video.
In the area, as does most of California actually. If you search, you can find reports of rampant cocaine use throughout the 1980s and early 90s before the dominant drug turns to opioids as prescription farms started to pop up all over America, creating the opioid epidemic. And then later in the early 2000s or so, the more dominant drug became methamphetamine as people started to learn about more simple manufacturing methods, which would mean the drug could be produced in the same place that it was sold, lowering the risk for the drug dealers of having to take it over borders, for example. Interstate 5, which runs from the San Diego-Mexico border all the way up to the Canadian border at Vancouver, is known to be a major drug trafficking corridor and does run parallel to Keddie, approximately 100 miles away, 110 miles away or so. However, I couldn't find anything which specifically related to LSD trafficking in this area at the time of the murders. Actually, I couldn't find anything that mentioned major drug trafficking taking place in the Keddie area at the time of the murders. No investigators recovered any drugs, drug paraphernalia of any kind during the investigation. I had been in touch with the Plumas County Sheriff's Office to see if they could give me the toxicology reports for the case, but at the time of production they hadn't got back to me, so I couldn't include it in the video. The only evidence of this theory which I could find were either in the Medium article which I referenced earlier, or in the forums of Keddie28.com. Medium states that an FBI agent thought that this theory held water, but that was not something that was shared by other investigators or his colleagues. Of course, it's definitely possible, but there's little to no evidence to support the theory, and I personally find it unlikely that Tina would want her family dead so that she could run away with her groomer. If the grooming theory were true, it would make much more sense to simply run away instead, as the punishment for running away is way less severe than quadruple homicide, and that is the same for the groomer too. The punishment for grooming someone is way lower than it is for murdering 4 people. So
I mean, yeah, that would sound more of a logical thing to do. But however, we know people, they really don't think. It'd be the most dumbest people committing crime. They really don't think. But when you have, how old was she? 14 years old? When you have a 14-year-old and you're grooming this 14-year-old, you got her into all kinds of stuff and this and that and the other. And if this 14-year-old wants to be with this person, they tend to do what it is that they want you to do because you groomed them, right? So even though they don't want to, but out of love or whatever it is that you're psyching their mind up to want or to be, they tend to attach to that, and they're going to do what it is that you're telling them to do so that they can have or be with the person that they want to be with. That's what grooming is about. Okay? So yeah, when you grooming someone, yeah, they're capable of doing things. Yeah, the logical thing would be, why not just run away and just be together or do what it is that y'all are seeking to do? Why come back and kill your whole family? That's the most logical thing to do. Just run away and just be done with it. But people are so crazy and so chaotic, and they believe the things that people tell them, especially when you're dealing with a young child, because I call them a child. They ain't grown. Someone that young is very easy, very, very easy to groom them, to get them to do whatever it is that you want them to do. So we're not gonna sit here and pretend that don't happen. Okay. Anyway, back to the
Just doesn't seem too likely that this theory holds water. I went into this theory with an open mind. I really did. But I just couldn't find anything to support it. Reading the theory was like watching someone join random dot to dots from two different pictures and then look confused why no one else can see the same picture that they do. Firstly, Sheila being motivated to kill most of her family because she had a bad mother is extremely tenuous and excessive. Even when people do have bad parents, most of the time those kids still love those parents. In the cases where they don't, they usually just break contact with them. It's extremely rare for said child to decide that the best course of action is to start murdering people. Now, one of the more common reasons cited for this theory that Sheila did it is to make herself famous and garner huge publicity and attention and, financial rewards for going on talk shows or book deals, etc. This again seems very unlikely, but even if we entertain it for a moment, it doesn't make any sense because she couldn't possibly know that she was going to get all those rewards until after she murdered everyone, and that seems like a really big risk to take just for fame. That's also ignoring that she would have to get away with it too. And finally, a 14-year-old girl torturing and murdering most of her family, including her younger sister, and then managing to leave no evidence in the room connecting her to the crime and also taking no evidence of the crime with her seems unlikely.
Well, it's like I said a few minutes ago, what makes sense doesn't make sense to a lot of people who have people in their head. It doesn't make sense to a lot of people. And today, a lot of people don't even have common sense. So they're just prone to do any and everything. Like, anything is possible with these people. I'm just saying. What makes sense isn't so much common sense to a lot of people. Things that we think that people wouldn't do, they do. So, really, technically, when it comes to crime or doing crazy stuff, we can't really sit there and rule certain things out just because it doesn't seem like that person would do something. I'm just saying. It's just a thought, right? Because again, the ones that we think or thought wouldn't commit a crime or do certain things are the ones that are committing these crimes and are doing these certain things. Back to the crime.
And for those who think it was a police conspiracy to hide the crime, why? They would have no motive to hide it and help her get away with it. If anything, they've got motive to catch her because that would make them look amazing. I'd like to quickly add something here because I know some people from the Keddie 28 website are going to see this video and are probably going to be angry that I didn't entertain the theories on there for longer. I did ask DMAC for access to the site so that I could review the evidence and theories on the site. After checking my YouTube channel, he gave me access, saying that he thought that I treated subjects fairly and that I, did good research. Later, I then sent him an email saying that I might not come to the same conclusion that he did, but that I would still give all the theories and evidence equal weight while researching. Now, I want to be clear here. I did not say that I didn't believe the theory. I just said that I wanted to see the evidence first before accepting it. DMAC lost his shit. He revoked my access to the site and started accusing me of having already made up my mind and having already finished the video, which doesn't even make sense. If I'd finished the video, why would I still be researching it? It became pretty clear to me that what he wanted was for me to accept and subscribe to this theory without viewing the evidence to support it first, or he would revoke my access. I wouldn't do that, so he revoked my access. I did want to give the theories and evidence a solid look, but DMAC literally prevented that from happening. This was a hard case to research because it's so messy. Not just the crime scene, but the investigation too. In fact, I've looked at a few different police investigations, and this is by far the worst one that I've looked at. It's easy to take a look at the lack of an arrested suspect and the fact that the evidence wasn't logged or followed up on or lost, and take the position that the sheriff's office must be covering it up. But the simplest answer is usually the correct answer. I don't think there was any kind of cover-up. I think it was very telling when Deputy Gamberg said that Sheriff Thomas was a new sheriff, a sheriff wanting to make his name, and suddenly was thrust into the middle of a case which would do just that, if he could crack it. I think this is the reason it's such a mess. The sheriff just didn't want anyone stealing his collar, which led to him making a number of mistakes and errors in judgment throughout the case. This explains why he resisted FBI help on numerous occasions, as he wouldn't want them taking over his case and instead used a local artist who he was already familiar with rather than include the FBI profilers. I think this is also why he made the very serious error of conducting the first hypnosis session with Justin Smart himself, something which should have been entrusted to a professional third party. The fact that he did it first means that he could have planted any information in Justin's head, either on purpose or by accident, doesn't even matter. I would argue actually that the use of hypnosis at all was a mistake, as it's not admissible evidence in court due to how easy it is to plant ideas in the subject's head. I think this explains why the investigation was such a mess. Someone who was unwilling to relinquish control of any aspect would inevitably become weighed down by its massive undertaking and public pressure. Unfortunately, all of these errors, I believe, have allowed an as of yet unnamed murderer to escape. I did contact the Plymouth County Sheriff Department to ask for information regarding the case, and despite being receptive and advising that they would look into it for me, haven't at the time of production got back to me. So I couldn't include any new information or any updates because they just didn't get back to me. There's a lot of conspiracy theories regarding this case, and some of them are pretty compelling. And some of them, they're seductive, they kind of pull you in. But I think the simplest answer is the best one. The police fucked up the investigation and the killer managed to evade detection as a result. Maybe someday we'll have an answer for this case, but right now, all we can do is debate it really. I'd like to quickly say thank you to Nicole Ryan, who assisted me with the research on this case and worked extremely hard to gather information for me. Thanks, Nicole. What do you believe happened at the Keddie Resort? Let me know in the comments section, and as usual, I'll read and respond to all comments for the first 24 hours. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.
I don't know what to believe because I'm with him on this. This is very messy. Very messy. It makes it hard to decide. But if I had to go on anything, I would say yes. It has something to do with the upper party, which is the cop, or whatever they called them back then, because this is a cold case. This is what, 40-something years, and they haven't caught the person. And this is why I say you got some stuff that goes on forever of the day and it never gets solved. That's what you call cold cases. But again, if I had to guess, I would have to say it's somewhere in the law enforcement have something to do with it. And I never thought it was the child that was missing. I never thought it was her. But it just twisted. It's just a lot of loopholes here. That doesn't make sense. It's a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense, you know. But yeah, this is crazy. But anyway, y'all, thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button for me. Share this video. Leave a comment. Yeah, these crimes, man, this is crazy. People are crazy today. They're just, I just don't understand people. I just don't get it. But anyway, y'all. So until next time, everybody, please stay safe. Peace. Afro Goddess is out.